Welcome back to another episode at the Slow Car Salon. We're working on the Celica here, and we're going to do a little bit of prep work while waiting for parts to come in. Things like cleaning the engine bay, getting the transmission ready, and tearing into the 1UZ just a little bit. So let's get started. So I've already gotten into the engine bay just a little bit. I've cleaned the right side of the engine bay just to kind of trial some different products to see what would work best. And it turns out simple green and a brush and a spray bottle with water worked just fine. And then odorless mineral spirits got all the tougher areas, kind of like down into the corners here and around edges and seams where it was a little dirty. And it worked really well. As for comparison, here's the left side of the engine bay, and it's still very filthy. Even the cross member, going from all this grime to a whole lot of clean and painted metal underneath. So I think that's job number one here. All right, that's looking a heck of a lot better. Everything's really cleaned up around the right side, the left side of the engine bay now, and the cross member is looking shiny. There's a little bit of grime back beneath and around the steering rack and whatnot that I'll still have to get at if I remove the steering rack, but I think that's good enough for now. And the left side of the engine bay here is where the battery sat, and let me get some stuff out of the way here. And I guess over time, it leaked battery acid and has sort of yellowed the paint in this area. So as much as cleaning and scrubbing as I could do, couldn't remove any of that. And back here, there's some yellowing of the clear coat or paint where I guess the exhaust manifold passed through and gave off quite a lot of heat, or came out from a exhaust leak from the manifold. Otherwise, I'd say this is looking pretty good. It's just going to let it dry out and maybe attack some other areas later on. Okay, so next up is the transmission. As you can see, I've already gone ahead and taken off the bell housing and the input shaft plate. I'm going to clean that up, and I'm actually going to replace the input shaft seal as well as the output shaft seal. And then for the output shaft seal, I'd have to knock this little ring that covers the drive shaft output, and then you can access the seal like that. So I'm going to get my seal puller here and take care of those two seals. Now, when I took out the plate here, it came with a paper gasket on the transmission, and it turns out I don't have to necessarily get a new paper gasket for it because I have this stuff. The Toyota 103 seal packing or form in place gasket, FIPG. It's really good stuff. It's a little on the pricier side, maybe $15-20 depending on where you get it from. But you get the sealant, a nozzle, and even a little key that you would put on the end of the tube to wind up and get all the gasket material out of it as you can. So I'm going to be putting a thin layer of that over the flange here of the plate and slap it back on. So let's get to it. Well, all right, that made very quick work of putting in the new seal. Now you may see that the output shaft doesn't actually seal into the seal put in here. Like the drive shaft, as it goes in, seals around that outer edge, and that's what actually seals it. So it's kind of threw me at first, but then I looked at the old seal and went, oh yeah, they're about the same size. So that should be fine. Just pressed it to its maximum depth, and it's really good to have a good set of various sockets so you can easily press these seals in and drive them in evenly. This was a very easy ordeal, and that it's all buttoned up and sealed up. So that preps the transmission for the adapter plate and then the auto 1UZ bell housing right on top of that. And at long last, we arrive at the engine. Now, I need to get this harness taken off, which means I need to take the intake manifold off, both the upper and lower. That will help me be able to pull out the wiring and plastics off the back here, and there's a couple of wires that go in for the starter and things like that. That way I can get this sent out to Josh at JMM Motorworks. He'll take out all the automatic transmission stuff, as well as make this basically a plug-and-play setup for the harnesses in the Celica, so that can all hook up. Dash and check engine light will work, all that good stuff. So in order to do that, this guy's got to come off, lower manifold is going to come off, and I guess while we're in there, I'll clean out the inside of the V. And I don't think I'll take off the valve covers yet because I don't have any of the paint and things I need for them yet. So that'll wait, but definitely intake manifold. Let's get started. There it is. Intake upper and lower have been removed. As you saw, I made sure to get in there with the shop vac and vacuum as I was getting stuff off, because we really don't want to get any stuff down in any of the intake ports. So I'm glad I got ahead with that. Of course, like many of the horrors described while Kelvin from the Cartoon Company in New Zealand disassembles these engines, because there's going to be carnage. For instance, the bimetal vacuum switching valve here, nipples broke clean off, so I'll have to get a new one of those. Thankfully, these are not super expensive. And then all the fuel injector plugs, yeah, they pretty much just broke, as well as a few other plugs. This one, I guess, survived. But yeah, that kind of thing happens. So hopefully Josh can replace these plugs and get new plastics for them. If not, I can see if I can try to source them myself. The front crankshaft harness or front engine harness here, I don't think that comes out until we remove more stuff over here. As that's not super crucial, because the main thing was just to pop off the intake manifolds. I thought this was going to have to come out with it, but they were just little metal tabs here that these kind of sat in. And then once I pop those off, then the whole thing could be lifted right out. But there it is. Engine harness is also out as well. With the starter motor, of course, now is a good time to replace them, but with these Nippon Denso starter motors, the motor actually doesn't go bad. It's the contacts which do. So I believe this is a 2 kilowatt starter motor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this off, clean it up, and then clean the contacts inside and make sure they're in good shape, and then put some dielectric grease on them and make sure that's good to go. This engine is, yeah, very, very complicated. There's much more stuff in here than I would have thought, but I guess that's how it comes when you want more features and more engineering and more power and more this and that. You get less simplicity. But that's all right, because this is going to be all refreshed and rebuilt and all that good stuff. Despite all the broken connections and things that went wrong in here, at least a lot of it will get cleaned out, refreshed, and then we should be rolling. And now finally, I'll move on to the front accessory drive, getting all the belt tensioner, idler, water pump, pulleys, all these front accessories off so I can get into the cam belt and stuff all behind it. So, of course, I'll make sure to bag and label all that, and we'll get it done just like that. Also earlier, I may have made mention that I called this the water pump, and although on some other engines it would be, This is not a water pump. This is just an idler for the hydraulic fan, or if it had a hydraulic fan pump, this would be the hydraulic fan pump. So thankfully I don't have to worry about deleting it, whereas this is just an idler, and I'll just smack the idler pulley over the top of this just to route the belt. And of course I will have to see how to route the belt now that the power steering pump is gone, but correction, this is not the water pump. The water pump is there. That's the water pump. Right back there. It runs off the cam belt, not the accessory belt. So if you have to do your water pump on your 1UZ, I feel bad for you. It's a lot of work to get to it. Well, that went faster than I thought. All the accessory drive is off, distributor caps and rotors all off, crank pulley off, which thank goodness for air tools. We got that, and I also had rented this puller for a separate job over here, where I'm doing a rear wheel bearing on our BMW E93. So that was really lucky. So that's all off. I did try to align the timing marks up here on the cam belt, although I don't necessarily see any reference over here with where it's supposed to be all aligned. There's a letter U right there, but I have to double check to see what actually determines whether that or not this is at TDC. Otherwise, there's definitely some more cleaning to do back here. I'm going to have to change out the cam belt, of course, and again, much like the same carnage that Kel finds on his 1UZ teardowns, cracked distributor rotors. Also, wow, look at the electrode. That's scungy. Into the bin it goes. Same with the other one, gross rotor tip, cracked. Bye-bye. So that wraps up the prep for the engine. At least for right now, until we get parts. Speaking of parts, let's go take a look at what's come in so far. Alright, time for the parts segment. I'll be going over the transmission adapter kit, the battery relocation kit, and also how I'm going to handle an oil filter relocation. Now, both the battery and oil filter relocation aren't exactly necessary. This is how I'm going to add some uniqueness to my swap, as well as try to offset some of the weight from the 1UZ, as it is 60 pounds heavier than the 22 RE. So let's get started with the adapter kit. Now, this is the entire kit from XAT Racing. They give you a beautiful billet transmission adapter, a chromoly steel flywheel, actually from a Scion TC that's actually has some re-drilling done to allow it to fit to the 1UZ crank, and a spec clutch, which is actually meant for an SW20 turbo or an ST185 Celica All-Track or GT4. It's rated for about 300 foot-pounds of torque. It's a stage 1 organic clutch, which should allow for some really good daily driving characteristics. And while it does come with a pilot and throwout bearing, the XAT Racing Kit has its own pilot bearing, a T56 style hydro throwout, which adapts right on top of the adapter plate here. ARP Hardware to mount the flywheel to the crank, its own pilot bearing, clutch lines, and all the rest of the hardware that you'll need to hook it up. And that from XAT costs around $1,600, so it may not be the cheapest, but it is the nicest kind of bolt-on solution. Next are the excessive manufacturing motor mounts. These I got actually used. New, they're about $120 from excessive manufacturing. You want to make sure you have this style. I believe they have another style that is a little older from previous iterations from Celica GTS forum members trying to contact them and get the dimensions right. So if you have these, they are symmetric, and these are the ones you'll want. Next up is going to be actually the brake apportioning valve. Now this brake apportioning valve I got from Flying Miata, and I got it particularly from Flying Miata because they have these metric adapters so that they can screw into the SAE threads of the Willwood brake apportioning valve and then output a metric thread so that they work straight up with the metric threads of the brake fittings on Japanese cars, particularly Toyotas and Mazdas, like the Miata. Next, we have the battery relocation. Now, I went with an AGM battery. This is an Odyssey PC1200, AGM meaning absorbed glass mat, which means that there are no open cells where you have to pour water into like a lead acid battery. This is completely sealed, so you never actually have to fill it up with water, and you can mount it in any kind of orientation you like, on its side, upside down even, depending on your application. I'll probably mount it on its side with the terminals kind of on the top side. And to connect that up with the charging harness and starter harness on the engine is a Turbo Start 1-odd wiring kit. It comes with 10 feet of red insulation wire and 3 feet of black insulation wire. They're stranded, so they're very flexible, It comes with battery terminals. I won't be using those because the Odyssey battery has screw-on terminals, and those are for clamp style terminals. It has P-clamps, ring terminals, and rubber grommets. Now, I won't actually be using the rubber grommets because I'll be getting firewall grommets. Those are on their way. But how those work is that they actually screw on either side of the firewall where your hole is with an O-ring in between in order to provide a solid seal so that you're not relying on just the pressure of the wire against the rubber grommet, and it might even be hard to move in and out. This will actually completely clamp up against the wire once it's threaded down. So that'll be really, really nice. And then of course, to allow power to be accessed from under the hood, I have a simple little power distribution post. I'll try to keep this away from any other metals or things where I'm trying to put a jumper cable in or something like that, so that I have my battery power under the hood when instead of the batteries going in the trunk, so that way I can charge the car or just get some kind of accessory power from the front. Now moving on to the oil filter relocation. Now that is the LS400 stock oil filter housing. Bolts onto the block, and then the output has a 3/4-16 threaded insert for the oil filter. Now I had to find particularly a oil filter housing that had the 3/4-16 thread and wasn't too expensive. A lot of them can get really expensive. I just wanted something simple. This one has 1/2-inch NPT output ports, so along with all this vibrant stuff, I have 1/2-inch to -8 AN adapters. And one note to make about this oil filter housing is it came with its own threaded insert, but it was a little funky as far as where they cut the threads in order to make it stop threading in. But it ended up being either too long or too short. So I ended up taking the thread from the stock oil filter housing and threading it into here. It has a little 27mm nut, and that will thread in just fine. I have the correct depth in order to thread on a OE style filter with the correct thread. This is a Wix 51348 filter, and it threads on the housing just fine. It throws all the way down, doesn't bottom out, makes a nice seal. So that's how this is going to be oriented. Actually, I have it facing up so that after the car is off, oil will drain away from the filter and I can take it off without any spillage. Others might like to put it upside down so they can fill the filter with oil first. That's okay too. I just want a clean setup for when I have to ever change the oil in this thing. Now going back over to the vibrant stuff, I got their -8AN braided racing hose and all of their adapter fittings and some line separators so that I can keep the lines from rubbing against each other. Now, in order to adapt the remote oil filter housing to the engine, I have another part coming in from Excessive Manufacturing, which is their 1UZ oil filter adapter, which also has 1/2-inch NPT threads on it. It also has the threaded port so I can use the stock oil pressure sending unit, so that way I have an oil pressure reading on the gauge. And that pretty much does it for all the parts here. What you see is around $2,100 or $2,200 actually. It's not cheap. The XAT kit by itself is about $1,600, but like I said, and I showed you, it gives you everything. The battery is a little over $200, the wiring kit's $100, and somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 to $200 for the vibrant stuff and the oil filter relocation. So I think, like I said, the oil filter and battery relocation are not required. So at the very least, you'd be spending about $1,500 to $1,600 for your clutch and adapter solutions. That way you can get the W58 transmission on the 1UZ auto bell housing with a clutch and flywheel and get that whole assembly onto the 1UZ and get it in the hole with those excessive motor mounts. Of course, I have more parts coming in, as I mentioned with this, and also some other OEM rebuild parts. I do still have like a water pump and timing kit, O2 sensors, other gaskets, all the ignition components, and yeah, those I'm not going to highlight because you'll see them as I put them in. It's all quality brand name stuff. I didn't go particularly with OEM for everything because then it would have gotten really expensive. I just went with good known brands, NGK, Bosch, Denso, you name it. So while waiting on more parts, I guess I'll clean up the engine some more, clean up the engine bay and get that corner where all that battery corrosion has taken the paint and yellowed it. I'll probably just spray that over with my rattle can just to kind of pretty it up a little bit. I won't repaint the whole engine bay. I'll have to clean up the garage a little bit more, of course, because I don't want to have a big mess to clean up at the end. Start getting everything ready for when all the OEM gasket and seals and other rebuild parts come in so I can take that motor more apart and put it all back together and have a good another 200,000 miles of reliability. So if you like what you saw, consider subscribing. I'll put all the links for all these products in the description, and of course they'll have their part numbers and exactly where I got them from, Summit Racing and XAT are pretty much the two places I got them from. And I'll see you in the next one.